Alright, welcome back ladies and gentlemen to the Feed Me Pixels review and recommendation series. I'm your host, Larry the Chupacabra, and today we're going to be taking a look at Warhammer End Times Vermintide by Fat Shark that takes you into the medieval side of the Warhammer universe, fighting against hordes of rat-like monsters in order to save the Empire, and probably, you know, people like it when their organs stay on the inside of their bodies, so that's pretty high up there on the list as well. And Warhammer Vermintide is a game developed and published by Fat Shark, who have a whole cavalcade of different games that they've made in the past, many of them quite popular on Steam. And Warhammer Vermintide is a action, kind of adventure fighting co-op game, very much like Left 4 Dead, that takes you running through various maps and environments in order to fulfill various objectives and story sort of quest lines so that you can, well, stay alive and save the world. I mean, everybody loves saving the world, don't they? So let's take a look at the gameplay side of things. Warhammer End Times Vermintide, or as we'll just call it, Warhammer Vermintide, throws the player and possibly their friends into a class-based cooperative horde fighter, where you're forced to fight off slews and even an entire army in some situations of an ancient enemy race to humanity known only as the Skaven, which are a race of giant rat men, which they're not quite the most polite thing on the planet, and they love nothing more than to have a lovely, relaxing afternoon picnic while eating your face. So you've got to jump through a series of around 13 different missions, accomplishing various different goals and getting around various different obstacles in order to slowly progress through the campaign and try desperately to stem the tide of this evil Skaven menace. So, the primary delineation in gameplay of Warhammer Vermintide over, say, some competing titles that exist in the same genre, like, you know, the old school Left 4 Dead or Left 4 Dead 2, is that Warhammer Vermintide uses its class-based system to try and delineate more tactic to the game and how you play the game than if you had a bunch of different characters that could all wield the same sets of weapons. You've got characters that specialize in being very hefty, tanky characters with giant shields and big, hefty axes and blunt maces and stuff. And then you've also got characters that specialize in long-range assassination, some AoE in the case of the Ember Mage, and a whole lot of mix and matching in between there when you start to unlock and get into magical items. So you can literally, as a player, sit down and say, okay, I just jumped into a random lobby with these people. Do I want to play as a heavy-hitting melee character? Or maybe I'd be better off as a long-range rapid-fire character in the case of the Elven Waywatcher. You know, it seems like this group, from what I'm seeing already, is getting kind of beaten up a little bit. Maybe I should switch and provide a little bit more area of effect damage by swapping to the Deadly Mage. And even beyond that, depending on what weapons you win at the end of different successful missions, you can even get characters that can penetrate armor, or wipe out waves of characters with a damage over time spell. There's really a whole lot of customization in this game, and this can really allow you to feel like not only a member of a ragtag band of mercenaries, but you also feel like a unique contributing member of the team because you have your own unique role that you have to fill, or else the team is going to get the socks knocked off of them. And really, with the set of different dangerous specialty enemies, like rats with Gatling turrets, or giant ogre rats, or even strange rat alchemists that can throw poison clouds on you, you really have to stay on your toes and understand the types of enemies that you can easily take out while your teammates focus on the rest of them so you don't get overwhelmed. So let's switch off here and take a look at the storyline of Warhammer Vermintide. Warhammer Vermintide is a pretty straightforward and simple game that just gives you a mission objective, gives you some very basic background information, and sends you off on your mission to stay alive, barely, while you fight through a gigundo enemy army filled with evil rat creatures, some of which have crazy magical technology, and that's all you're really given. But there is a sort of simplistic storyline going on here. Warhammer Vermintide takes place in the medieval side of the Warhammer universe, which is, in fact, related to the Warhammer 40k, just on the other end of the history spectrum, and the story goes that the ancient gods have grown tired of their endless warfare and stalemate upon the world, and they've decided to summon ancient powers from beneath the earth in order to wipe the board clean in blood, torment, and pain. So, with this, the ancient enemies of man, the Skaven hordes that have long since been believed wiped out, have risen from the darkness under the light of an evil, eerily green glowing moon, and they have decided to invade the empires of man. And they've done so in a very secretive fashion in the center of the empire, where no one suspected that anyone would ever try to attack them. So you have to take your ragtag band of mercenaries just back from rescuing but capturing a witch, and you have to use both your own powers and her skills in order to try and fend off the hordes before they can successfully invade the empire from within. This takes you from, different missions that build out sort of the universe of Warhammer Vermintide, including some of the other characters and some of the other powers that exist, including mages and horns that can summon armies from afar, and even just a little bit of the background of each of the characters, because there is a fair amount of story-based voice acting that goes into the different characters and how they talk with one another during some of the lulls in the action during the game. So there's not a terrible lot of story, and it's not an extremely heavily story-driven game, but there is just enough of a tidbit to help drive you through and give you a reason why fighting off all of these scary rat people is probably in your best interest, minus the fact that I hear the young people really like it when their skin stays on their body. I don't know, it's weird, but whatever they're into, man. So let's talk about the graphics. Warhammer End Times, like a lot of action-adventure games, as you would expect these days, does a pretty good job of utilizing the most recent game engines to produce really stellar graphics. And above really well-polished graphics that run pretty well even on the highest settings for some of the lower-end hardware, you've got a whole lot of specialty gore effects. When you're fighting the enemies in Warhammer End Times Vermintide, you'll end up cleaving off heads, chopping off arms, cutting rats in half, blowing them into little bits. There is a lot of small articulation that goes in here that provides you with a lot of satisfaction when you cleave into the various creatures using a giant great mace, a cannon, an explosive, a ball of fire. They do a nice job delineating things before all of the creatures fall into a dead ragdoll body. So there's really nothing to complain about as far as graphics are concerned, although I have noticed that even during some of the released missions that I have seen a bit of vertical sync tearing on AMD graphic systems, so just be on the lookout for that. Sometimes that can be a little bit annoying to different people. But other than that, the game looks pretty gorgeous, and I really don't have any complaints. There's great textures, there's great water effects, there's great skybox effects, and some mist and some clouds, and a whole host of particles. You won't be left wanting in that department. So after that, we've got the sound design. Warhammer End Times Vermintide has a whole slew of well-made sounds that all sound very unique, very custom, and very on point for the things happening around you. You've got slashing sounds for swords, exploding sounds for alchemical explosives, and even a whole host of different sounds for the evil magical devices that roll around within the game. And one thing that I wasn't really expecting from this game when I first started checking it out was you get a whole lot of voice acting out of this game. There isn't a ton of story in Warhammer Vermintide, like I've already stipulated, but a lot of the characters have some really funny and really witty banter that they go about, like making fun of the dwarf and his drunken antics and the fact that it smells like you could light his breath on fire with the spare traces of magical fire from the Ember Witch. And it's actually rather amusing during the downtime that helps to kind of break up the monotony of going from one area, killing a giant ogre of a rat, and then having to kill off 50 of his friends in the next room over. So all that stuff's pretty on point. I actually got a pretty good kick out of it. I mean, that was a really nice level of polish for a game that I didn't really expect it from. So that about wraps up our look at Warhammer End Times Vermintide. It's a pretty fun game, and at $30, it's pretty good for all of the different missions and gameplay replayability that it provides you. You've got 13 different missions with 3 levels of difficulty and a whole slew of different weapons that you can try to mix and match and play it however you'd like, and even to craft and upgrade and accentuate them with alternative stats. So I would recommend Warhammer Vermintide to anyone who's looking for a cooperative PvE-based game where you fight through hordes using tactics and basic gameplay mechanics, using the items you find in the environment in order to stay alive as a ragtag band of mercenaries who are based out of, well, a drunken tavern. I mean, there's really nothing not to love about that. And it's only $30, so it's not like you're gonna, like, find out that there just isn't that one gameplay mechanic and be mad that you spent all that money. It's only half of the price of your standard $60 title. So that's it for this one, ladies and gentlemen. I've been your host, Larry the Chupacabra. If you enjoyed this Feed Me Pixels review and recommendation, make sure that you subscribe and check out their stream. They do a lot of great stuff here and produce a lot of great content. And if you're interested in some more stuff by me, your delectable Chupacabra host, then you can check out my channel. In the description, there's a wonderful link, and I do things like reviews on my own channel, and I also do some Let's Plays, the occasional interview with a developer, first looks, you know, whatever you have involving video games. I'm probably done it, or I'm gonna do it sometime in the future. So check me out, and I'll catch you crazies next time. Toodaloo, everybody, and have a good one.